everyone, and welcome to Talk Nerdy. It's Monday, June 19th, and I'm your host, Cara Santamaria. This week, I had the opportunity to chat with author Kavin Senapathy. But before we dive into that, I want to thank those of you who made Talk Nerdy possible. Remember, Talk Nerdyism will always be 100% free to download, and that's because of the generous support of listeners like you. This week, I want to thank Rob Schreck, as well as Troy Ioy. I hope I'm pronouncing your name right there, Troy, for your generous support through the PayPal portal, which you can find at my website, carasantamaria.com. And over at patreon.com/talknerdy, I want to thank Phil T-Bear, Timothy Glover, Jonathan Wright, Christian Jeffrey, Jeffrey Perez, Stuart Ogue, The Honorable Husband, Jafe, Gabriel Felipe Jaramillo Gonzalez, Brian Holden, and Jeffrey Sewell. And remember, there are way more ways to support the show than just financially. You can rate and review on iTunes. You can share on social media, which I want you to do anyway. Come say hi on Twitter and Facebook at Cara Santamaria or facebook.com/ScienceCara. And of course, visit the Talk Nerdy store where I have lots of nerdy wares for you. I actually just got a big new shipment of hand-thrown Talk Nerdy mugs by the wonderful artisan Henry Bloomer. Check them out. I got a whole bunch more in stock, so pick up yours before I run out again. All right, guys, I'm really excited about this week's episode. I chat with Kavin Senapathy, and she is a public speaker. She's a writer. She is a contributor to both Forbes and Grounded Parents. She's also the co-executive director of March Against Myths, and she mostly focuses on skepticism in the areas of science, health, medicine, agriculture, food, and parenting. And I think that she is just so dialed in, so interesting, and such an important voice for the skeptic movement. I actually asked her to be the fill-in rogue for me when I leave town next week. So I'm really excited about that. She'll be joining the Skeptic's Guide to the Universe soon. But for now, you can hear her right here on Talk Nerdy. Here she is, Kavin Senapathy. Well, Kavin, thank you so much for joining me today.
It's awesome to be here.
I am so excited we finally made this work, and you are so patient with me because my schedule is insane, and I've pushed this back like twice, I think.
I know. If we were a little more gullible, we might believe in fate by now, right?
Right.
We were not meant to get together.
Yeah. Luckily, we are not that credulous. And you are really, I think, a glowing example of skepticism in modern media, which is not common. It's especially not common from a woman. It's especially not common from an individual who, I don't know, I don't think of historically as like the top kind of, how can I put this without sounding like a jerk towards the people I'm talking about? But like the standard, like crusty old white men in the skeptic community.
Right.
Do you even consider yourself a part of the skeptic community?
Your typical skeptic? I do. I would say I'm kind of, in terms of being part of the skeptic community, I'm a newbie. Like I've always known of the skeptics movement, but I really sort of got into it only a few years ago. So yeah, I would consider myself a skeptic if I had to slap a label on myself.
I dig it. And you are a Midwesterner skeptic, aren't you?
I am. I was born in D.C. I've lived in Madison, Wisconsin since I was 5. So yeah, I'm a cheese-loving Midwest skeptic. And beer, of course, although I prefer wine, I guess.
But of course, you don't have a Midwestern name because is it safe to assume that you are a second generation?
Yeah, so my parents were immigrants from India, and I grew up going to India every few years. My mom's whole side of the family lives there. But yeah, my parents named me Kavin Senapathy, although conspiracy theorists have suggested it's a made-up name, but it's on my birth certificate. It's totally who I am.
Why would anybody think you made that name up?
So I've been accused of everything from having a fake name, i.e. like the big ag or big pharma or whoever is the boogeyman that day made up. I've even heard that my kids are these elaborate props in like this vast conspiracy to make, just if there's someone that makes like mainstream medicine, genetic engineering, everything seem just normal, then that's pretty threatening. So it can't be real. It's got to be made up.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the worst I've been accused of is being on Monsanto or Pfizer's payroll.
Oh yeah.
But it doesn't go much deeper than that for me. But you probably are a huge target by these groups that you are trying to sort of shed light on and show the dark corners of. So let's dive into that. Would you say that your main job is that you're a freelance science writer?
Yeah, I would say that's my main job. I also do some public speaking, and I also have a small role at my parents' company. It's a family business, small family business, mainly does IT consulting, but then also genomics data analysis. And so sometimes I get flack for that because whenever people see the word genomics or genetics, people don't understand that genetics is kind of this language of life, and data analysis could apply to pretty much any form of life. But when people see genetics, they're like, see, you're a shill for GMO. It's like, it's out there. Everyone knows it. Why do people believe you? I'm like,
Oh,
no,
no.
we're just analyzing information. That's about it.
But it does probably help you kind of keep up to date. It's so difficult as a science reporter to keep up to date on everything that's happening in the world. So kind of having your foot in the science pool is probably really helpful.
Yeah, I'd say it is, along with the fact that I'm pretty much like have Facebook chat windows and different chat windows open all day with scientists and farmers and doctors and such in them, and I'm just picking brains. Like that's what I do, like for maybe hours a week. I haven't calculated how much I do it, but yeah, all of that kind of comes together to keep me up to date.
Absolutely. So, probably your major outlet, at least from what I've seen of your byline, is Forbes. Is that correct?
Yep, I'm a regular contributor to Forbes, so several columns per month on Forbes. But yeah, I'm active on social media. Pretty much anyone that'll listen to me, I'll talk to. Uh,
And it seems like you've made a kind of concerted effort to write specifically in a way that debunks misinformation when it comes to science concepts. And I think some of the most popular concepts right now in sort of the public consciousness that are just full of misinformation have to do with things like GMOs and vaccines and, what I think the conspiracy theorists might call, quote, allopathic medicine, which is actually just a word for medicine.
right, like anything kind of mainstream. I mean, I've our mainstream misconceptions, I could say. Like I also address, and this has been popular and maybe unpopular, the kind of fallacy that breast is best compared to formula. So it's almost the umbrella is the appeal to nature fallacy.
Mm-hmm.
Tends to be what I address.
Gotcha. Yeah. So just scanning through some of your most recent articles, um, anti-vaccine, anti-GMO, Dr. Oz,
Yeah.
another GMO article. Here we go. Logical fallacies appeal to nature. Ooh, these 5 natural toxins in food have caused real harm. It's true. There are things that happen totally through like very traditional breeding and hybridization that have nothing to do with GMOs, where toxins will pop up. Okay, some Gupta, some summit promoting cancer misinformation tries and fails to use Sanjay Gupta to gain credibility. Love it. Some
Yeah.
more Monsanto stuff, some March for Science stuff, and also this breastfeeding story. Tell me a little bit more about that, because I think that that's less obvious to maybe the listeners of my show or the listeners of the Skeptic's Guide, who hear about GMOs and anti-vaccine movements and stuff quite often.
All right. So you're asking about kind of breastfeeding misinformation.
Yeah, yeah, because I don't
Yeah.
know.
So
Maybe I was one of, I don't have kids, so I've really honestly never taken
I
the time to
totally,
read about it.
I
But
believe that. I mean, and this is pretty common these days.
yeah.
Some of your listeners might be familiar with what's called the Baby Friendly Hospital Initiative, and it's a World Health Organization initiative that certifies hospitals as what's called baby friendly. So basically, that means that a hospital is equipped to, or it supposedly means that a hospital is equipped to promote breastfeeding. Kind of by by any means necessary. So the basic
Mm.
premise is that breast is best. Breast milk and breastfeeding is better than formula, and certain groups will even promote that formula is harmful. Formula formula fed kids are more likely to have issues ranging from allergies, asthma, higher incidence of chronic disease, and maybe even lower income in adulthood. But when you look at the data and really look at this vast weight of data rather than specific studies, none of that really pans out right. You can't separate the outcomes without addressing potential confounding factors. And what we find is really the bottom line is there may be better outcomes on the whole for children who are breastfed or who were breastfed during infancy for an extended period of time, but that could be, or all, most evidence points to that children who tend to be breastfed have parents who are, have higher income levels, are less likely to smoke, are more likely to read to them and spend time with them because largely because the way policy is set up right now, women who tend to be able to take an extended amount of time off of work and stay home and breastfeed their kids and or pump at work tend to have some of these privileges that formula fed or the parents of formula kids may not have.
Sure, sure. Yeah. So they may be in an economic position to stay home with their kids. They're probably also more likely to eat well and less likely to drink. You mentioned smoking too, which, of
Right.
course, these are all kind of confounding variables that could actually be responsible. It may not be the breastfeeding itself, but all the things that come
And
along with the
I was
breastfeeding.
totally like, so I became a mom 6 years ago. I have two kids, a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old. And I completely bought into that idea. So I was determined to breastfeed almost at all costs. And I gave birth at one of these baby friendly hospitals. And my it's natural for a newborn to lose a little bit of weight before it starts gaining weight, but my daughter lost something like 11% of her weight, and I was like beside myself when my doctor finally, I took the baby in for its regular checkup. You have checkups every few days after the baby's born, just standard. And the doctor's like, maybe you should, I think you should start supplementing. You just have to do formula for a couple days and then you can go back to the breast. And I thought I was this failure. My husband and
Yeah.
baby were in the car with me and we pulled up to Walgreens and I'm in the formula aisle and I'm like, I feel maybe paranoia and like sleep deprivation, but I'm like, all these people are looking at me and judging me. And then we did formula for 2 days. It was fine. Then, then I breastfed her and my son for like a year each. But looking back on it, it was. I mean, I was in the position to be able to do that. And if I had any more kids, which is no, I'm not having any more kids. But if I did, I would seriously consider just going right to formula because it really affects the autonomy of mothers and affects our long-term income, affects our long-term success. So I just think that it's important for choices to be well informed. I think breastfeeding is great if you want to do it, but base it on facts and not kind of misinformation and fear.
Sure. You're not saying that based on this research, moms shouldn't breastfeed, but you're saying breastfeeding at all costs could potentially have harmful outcomes, right? Like, what if your
Right.
child just has a really hard time latching on? What if you don't produce enough milk? That doesn't mean that your child is going to grow up poor and stupid. And it
Sure.
doesn't mean that you're a failure as a mother. It's just
Right.
the luck of the draw sometimes.
I mean,
That's
I
why
don't think
formula exists, right? That's the whole point.
it's a wonderful invention. I don't think like at high school graduation people are talking about like thank you mom for breastfeeding me. Without you, I couldn't be here today.
Yeah, seriously. And plenty of mothers may not have the capability of breastfeeding for other reasons. They may be carrying certain types of diseases or,
Yeah,
for whatever reason, that doesn't mean that they're bad moms. And I think that's an important
sure.
message to get across for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah.
That's great. That's cool that you're busting myths in this kind of like mom area, which I think is one of the places where quackery is just rampant. Like you look at people like Gwyneth Paltrow, she's probably the prime example, but there's so many sort of Hollywood female celebrities that push all sorts of garbage nonsense on the mommy blogs. And a lot of the traditional skeptics, like we mentioned, the crusty old white man, no offense, probably aren't talking about these types of topics.
Oh no, yeah, they're not. And I mean, I think it's important not only because, I mean, as a skeptic or as, what I do is I mean, the bottom line is a lot of these viewpoints are wrong, but more importantly, like they harm people, like moms who are constantly terrified, moms and dads. But the truth is, I mean, a lot of these marketers or movements are based in sexism. So they go after moms because of vulnerability, and they don't really go after dads in the same way. And so, yeah, I mean, it's harmful for to parents. It's harmful to children. It's harmful in some ways to the economy, and more importantly, our views in the developed world influence policy in such a way that it also affects people that affects people in the developing world who have less power and privilege than we do.
For sure. And, it really does run in that parallel, doesn't it? I think it's important that these types of myths get busted across the board. We often think of this as sort of like a privileged American, yuppie, suburban issue, but misinformation occurs everywhere. Anti-science rhetoric runs the gamut from sort of bourgeois anti-vaxxers living in Orange County in California, all the way to anti-GMO rhetoric in, villages in India. It's a problem that runs the gamut.
It does, yeah. From so we might vote, or people love to use the term vote with your dollar. We might vote with our dollar, buy something certified non-GMO project, share articles about why these things are dangerous. And these things kind of trickle in a way that affect, say, farmers in Uganda, where xanthomonas wilt, it's a disease of bananas, is affecting food security in places where a certain crop might constitute 30% of the caloric intake of the average person. And we're not seeing these things here, but it's a very real effect.
Yeah, and we don't really think about what an influence the Western world has on some of these developing countries. I mean, I think a perfect example and a perfect parallel of the Ugandan banana problem is the anti sort of LGBTQ mentality that exists now in Uganda as well. There's a beautiful film called God Loves Uganda, and it's a documentary that kind of goes to show that a lot of the criminalization of homosexuality and the brutal violence against homosexuals in Uganda is not a function of sort of indigenous thought, but was brought there by American evangelical Christians. And so it's really interesting how it often goes full circle, that our ignorant rhetoric that's not based in science, happening way over here in the sort of quote unquote isolationist West, is having a real effect on people who are who don't have nearly the resources that we have and can't fight this kind of misinformation as easily as we do. And even we are struggling with it.
Yeah, we're struggling, and I think part of that struggle, and feel free to disagree with me, is this idea that we just need to fill the information, or yeah, the information deficit,
Yeah.
right? Like I myself, people say that I am a myth buster or I debunk things, which is all great. I mean, I think it's great to come in with evidence and show why certain worldviews are wrong, but the broader picture is that, like, you can't just throw information or data at someone who really believes something, or who is unsure, and expect to just say, look here, I just showed you you're wrong, so change your mind. You
Yeah.
really got to go in with emotional context, social context, and it's just science communication. I think I heard a recent podcast, either it was yours or Skeptic's Guide or something, talking about why are, even with the best of intentions, it doesn't always work, or it's more of a long haul rather than a sprint, marathon, not a sprint.
Absolutely. And part of that, they're all the kind of SciComm tips that we talk about: meeting people where they are, understanding your audience, not underestimating their intelligence. But a lot of that is really difficult to do if you yourself, as a science communicator or as a kind of anti quackery warrior, don't have a strong grasp of philosophy and of psychology and of all of the sort of cognitive biases and the things that we have inside of ourselves, because we're all victim to those things. We have to become aware of them, and then we have to know how to work within the boundaries of our own kind of mental limitations in order to help other individuals come to that light. And of course, that's something that you do so incredibly well. I wouldn't want to ask you to rank what you think the most pernicious pseudoscience is that's out there, but what are some of the topics that you, I think, feel really strongly about and like to keep sort of banging the drum on?
That I keep going back to? Well, I'd
Yeah.
say, oh, that's a hard one, but definitely we've talked this out already, but definitely the GMO issue is really important to me. Actually, just this past weekend, my group, March Against Myths, it's a grassroots group that fights what we call pseudoscience injustice. We counter protested a organization called March Against Monsanto, which some of you guys may be familiar with. It is or was a huge organization. It's hard to say now, that started in opposition to corporate power, which I can totally understand that sentiment, but has since then evolved to anti-GMO, anti-vaccine, anti-fluoridation in water. Chemtrails are a real kind of group, and the anti-vaccine issue is kind of at the top of their agenda this year, and that really hurts people the same way that the anti-GMO movement hurts people. And so, yeah, we went out, counter protested for the third year in a row, and this might be the last year we have to do it, because it seems like for there might be a few factors influencing this. Maybe people are all protested out this year with the March for Science and all the Trump rallies,
Mm.
or maybe it's just that the anti-vaccine part of this platform now is dividing their followers. But as a small group, we're kind of taking that as a victory and moving on to more formidable targets. But again, going back to why I keep going back to this myth is that it's so pervasive. In the skeptics community, we think of anti-vaccine. The anti-vaccine movement we know is harmful, it's bad, it's wrong, and it's kind of on this shelf of tinfoil hat clad ideas, right? But then the anti-GMO movement is based in similar disinformation, similar tactics, and goes against a similar level of consensus. Yet when we walk into the grocery store, it's in our face all the time, as if it's somehow acceptable. And I can't. I'm not okay with that, and so that's why, among other topics, I keep going back to this one.
Yeah, it's an incredibly important one, and it's just rife with misinformation. I have to say, I think it's funny that March for Monsanto has become an anti-vax group, because like Monsanto has nothing to do with vaccines.
Right. I mean,
So it's like, whoa, way to keep on message.
I'm subscribed to their newsletter, and they're selling. I've also written about some of these online miniseries, docuseries, usually known as summits. So there's everything from like the microbiome summit, which is basically an abomination of all things microbiome science, or so now there's these truth about cancer and truth about vaccine series, which just by hearing the titles of those, you kind of know
Yeah.
what the truth about vaccines is. But anyway, yeah, March Against Monsanto is um, selling access to this truth about vaccine series, and yeah, they're full-blown anti-vax. And I mean, when you really get into the bowels of these movements, you find that they kind of are stem from the same place, and the same people follow them and hold them dear.
Absolutely. Maybe we should take a minute, because I feel like on Talk Nerdy, specifically on this podcast, I often talk to scientists and science communicators and just, generally interesting individuals about their research, about their focuses. And sometimes when we mention skepticism, I think we kind of talk about it in a meta way, like, oh, well, everybody just knows that GMOs are good and that it's crazy to be anti-GMO. So let's talk about why that is, instead of actually digging deep into why that is, right? I think a lot of times we do that on the Skeptics Guide, but I don't take as much time on Talk Nerdy to hash these things out. So I wonder if there are people listening right now who are saying, wait, but I thought GMOs were bad. I'm confused. Why should I just assume that they're good? What is the argument here? So why don't we dig into that a little bit? I mean, it's something you do so very well and have made very good cases for in your writing. So let's talk about, I guess, first the conflation that people make between their issues with corporate food, their issues with patenting seeds, their issues with corporate practices that Monsanto might use, and the idea of genetic modification or transgenes in a lab. Let's maybe first we could talk about how those two things are different, and sometimes people are maybe throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
Right. So, yeah, as you said, people tend to conflate genetic engineering, which is a set of techniques for precisely choosing a trait and putting it into or having it expressed in a specific plant. But it's really a term shrouded in mystery. Skeptics, again, a lot of us know that, okay, we should be pro GMO, like you said, but why? I'd say largely GMO, which stands for genetically modified organism, is a scapegoat for both very real and also perceived agricultural and food system problems. So when people think GMO, they think monoculture, chemicals, pesticides, cancer, junk food, obesity, and this idea of the transformation of life forms into intellectual property. So all of these ideas of that people worry about in the food system and in agriculture. Patents, for example, are not unique to GMOs. They're not unique to Monsanto. There are a lot of food products that can be sold as organic that are protected by patents. There's even non-GMO verified crops or plants. One example is called the opal apple. It's the first non-GMO project verified apple, and it is patented. So there is there are R&D costs that go into developing new varieties of crops, and so patents are a way that companies protect that. You can be against this, but again, you can't logically be against GMOs because patents. Like, that doesn't make sense. So
Yeah. And same with
one.
monoculture, right? Like you can be
Right.
against the idea of growing too much of one crop or maybe even beyond monoculture. I think sometimes a reasonable argument is ag subsidies for like corn, for example. Like
Mm-hmm.
if we make so much corn in this country that we can't sell it all and we end up throwing half of it away because it's, it costs more money or it makes the farmers more money to make it than it's worth for them to sell it, then we end up finding uses for corn everywhere. And we have high fructose corn syrup in everything we eat. And we have corn as a basis for, all of our animal food and for all of our cereals and all of our staple foods. And some people have a problem with that because of, like you said, this slippery slope to obesity and things like that. But that has nothing to do with genetic modification. It just so happens that because corn is such an important staple crop in American agriculture, it happens to be one of the crops that was genetically modified early so that we could have better yields and so that the crop wouldn't fail. That's what genetic modification often leads to. This is why we do it, to prevent disease, to improve shelf life, to improve, resistance to pests, whatever the case may be. And because we have so much damn corn in America, of course, corn is going to be a GMO crop first, or it's going to be one of the earliest. But that has nothing to do with whether or not you think corn should be subsidized or you think corn should be in everything that we eat. Those are two different conversations to be had, right?
Right. And I think perhaps one of the most disturbing things about this is that these aren't arguments or ideas that we just came up with on our own. This kind of misinformation or conflating of multiple issues in to anti-GMO thought has been
Mm.
planted by either ideological and or companies or leadership with financial motivations or other reasons planted from the top that GMO causes this, and this problem is the fault of GMO XYZ, and it trickles down, and by the time it hits the general public, it seems as if it's this fundamental problem. Even this idea that that GMO is unnatural and everything else is the way nature intended was planted by ideologues and misinformation mongers. I mean, what a lot of people don't know is everything, including heirloom and organic, has been genetically tinkered with in completely unnatural ways, and not just what people think of as traditional breeding, like really unnatural ways using mutagenic chemicals and radiation to kind of willy-nilly roll the mutation dice until we get something beneficial, after which it's commercialized. And again, a lot of these can be sold as organic. And so, yeah, it's such a messy arena.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it really is. And I think I wonder how much of that has to do with just interests in regulatory kind of interest in how we write our regulatory laws and also how we enforce them. You know, there's so many on both sides of the aisle, and maybe I shouldn't even say the aisle because this is not a partisan issue, but on multiple sides of the argument, there are lobbying groups. You know, of course Monsanto has lobbies, and of course other large multinational agricultural companies have lobbies, but other groups have lobbies as well. The organic food kind of group is lobbying in order to keep certain types of labels because they know that they are good for marketing. They
Right. I
know that it
mean,
helps.
it's a saturated market, and I mean, it's a fact that our food supply has never been more safe or abundant or varied. And so they kind of had to find their place in this marketplace, have to differentiate their products from the rest of them. And so, yeah, that's kind of what it's rooted in.
And, you know, sometimes I think skeptics will say, I'll ask a question like, do you think this individual, let's say we're talking about a fortune teller. That's a good example. A fortune teller. Do you think that, you know, this woman, for example, is a true believer, or do you think that she is a real charlatan and that she knows she's duping people and she does it anyway? And sometimes the kind of skeptic answer will be, it doesn't matter. It's just as pernicious either way. I personally think that intent does matter for the conversation. I don't exactly know how I measure how much it matters, but I am
Right.
always interested in those motivations. And it seems like when it comes to this kind of anti-GMO, pro-organic rhetoric, of course, there are always going to be a handful of individuals, and oftentimes these individuals have some sort of architectural say in the movement that maybe are, you know, just charlatans, and maybe they're like, oh, whatever, if we slap this label on it, we know we make more money, even though it makes no difference, twirl my mustache. But I do think that a lot of the people that are involved in furthering this rhetoric are really true believers. They truly believe that genetically modifying something makes it less healthy or could have a potential downstream harmful effect. And for that reason, sticking to quote unquote what Mother Nature made for us, which we know is a fallacy, is more healthful. And it doesn't help that this is reinforced over and over and over in everything that they're reading. So that's a problem, right? That this is a an
It is.
understandable position to take, and one that it's yes, naive, but also in many ways very pure and kind of an honorable position to make, albeit incredibly misguided.
Yeah, I agree. I agree that I care about people's motivations. I mean, it's hard sometimes, or I think always, actually to quantify like how disingenuous is the
Yeah.
leadership of a certain movement or any specific leader. And you know, and that brings me back to the whole mom and parenting thing. And Gwyneth Paltrow, and especially Sarah Michelle Gellar. A few years ago, some of these celebrities came out in opposition to GMOs, and I'm not sure if they were aware that this group that was um, featuring them in advertisements and videos and a campaign called the Concealer Reveal campaign, put on by this group called Just Label It, used Sarah Michelle Gellar, Gwyneth Paltrow and a few of these other celebrity moms to speak out against GMOs. And I do believe that Gwyneth Paltrow's a different one, but Sarah Michelle Gellar, I believe that they are totally behind it. They believe that GMOs might somehow harm their kids, and they need to keep these foods out of their bodies. And that actually launched a campaign called the Moms for GMOs campaign, and later a documentary called the Science Moms documentary that'll be out this summer,
Oh,
in which
yay.
moms who know better kind of
Yeah.
addressed with some compassion, addressed these celebrity moms and explained why this is a problem and why they may be misled. And yeah, so that movement made some impact. We haven't heard back from the celebrities yet. Maybe we will when the movie comes out. But yeah, the whole intent thing is important because I mean these women seem pretty genuine when you see them speaking out about these issues, and I truly can't blame them. I mean, because the anti-GMO movement is a strong and clever one.
Absolutely, with good marketing and PR officials on their team. You know, it's interesting you mentioned the whole labeling issue. I think that's been a big issue in California, where I live. You know, it's been a ballot initiative multiple times, and you see a lot of the kind of ground zero of these sorts of marches and these arguments happening here. And I have some dear friends here in LA, who are brilliant individuals who are incredibly concerned about health and nutrition and wellness, who ask me all the time because they know that I'm pro GMO and they know that I always vote against these labeling initiatives. And they ask me, what why don't you just want to label it? I don't understand. Don't you want people to know where their food comes from? And of course, my argument, and I'm interested to see, because you probably have a much more even thought out argument than mine, but my argument is if we single out whether or not something has a transgene in it, whether or not something was genetically modified in a laboratory as a necessity for a label, yet we leave out all of the other interesting information that could help us make informed decisions. What we're essentially doing is putting a warning label on a food that doesn't require one because the evidence show that there is no harm to consuming these GMOs. So if we're going to label it, which I'm not against putting the words GMO on a package, but I think that they should also come along with a label that shows how far the food traveled from the farm. And I don't know, like all sorts of other important pieces of
Right.
information that aren't on a label currently. For me, it's one or the other. It can't just be GMOs, because then all of a sudden we might as well put a skull and crossbones next to it. Let's just go all the way.
Yeah, I mean, one of the other science moms, Jenny Splitter, just wrote something in New York Post talking about all the things that should be labeled if we're going to label GMO, and I
Oh,
forgot to,
good. So she
but yeah,
aggregated all of that.
she did. It's Jenny Splitter. If you guys Google her name in New York Post, you should be able to find it. But the thing is, I'm not. I'm used to be like staunchly anti-labeling, and now I've kind of
Mm-hmm.
just lost my steam. And anyway, the law goes into effect in 2018 that anything produced with genetic engineering either has to be labeled as such, or there has to be a QR code or an 800 number or a website, which the anti-GMO camp is pretty upset about because I don't know, nitpicking, I guess. But the point is that people think that if something is labeled GMO or non-GMO, that it tells us something about how it was grown, whether it was grown
Mm-hmm.
sustainably, whether it used pesticides, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And a GMO label really tells us none of that. It tells us nothing except for the breeding technique. It doesn't tell us how the workers were treated, nothing. So
Yeah, it doesn't
people
tell
kind
us
of,
about pesticides. It doesn't tell us about
right.
chemicals that were used during the cultivation. And it tells us nothing about health, because if you took a transgenic, I don't care, cucumber, which there aren't any on the market, but we'll
Yeah.
say that there were. If you took a transgenic cucumber and put it next to a conventionally bred cucumber, and you had, 15 different tools available at your disposal, scientific tools, and said which one has the transgene in it, unless you knew where that gene was and you knew what it would naturally be expressing and how it was manipulated to either turn on or turn off some sort of trait, you wouldn't know because the cells and the DNA, other than this one gene, everything else about the cucumber is exactly the same. Like you just
Right.
can't tell based on the fruit.
And you're bringing up transgenic organisms, but the funny thing is, and I haven't addressed this a lot yet, but I plan to. Next, the next kind of step on the anti-GMO movement's agenda is to kind of demonize gene editing, CRISPR edited crops, even if it's not transgenic, even if it is just edited or something with, if you use a cucumber gene in a cucumber, it's not really considered transgenic.
So when we say a transgene, we're talking about across species?
Right. So at least like a bacterial
Mm-hmm.
gene or something. I actually asked the non-GMO project, how do you plan to treat gene edited foods as those start hitting the market? And they kind of didn't have an answer for me. I'm like, what if it's not transgenic? What do you plan to do? And they're like, and they went and talked amongst themselves and then got back to me and they're like, yeah, we're going to treat all of these as GMO and they won't be eligible for our label. And so, like this kind of battle that's happening behind the scenes is, should gene edited or CRISPR edited stuff be considered quote GMO or not? And that's an argument because I mean you can ask experts, you can ask genetic engineering experts, hey, is this considered a GMO? What are people thinking for the future of this thing or whatever? And people won't know because it's so confusing.
Yeah, and it's so new. And
Yeah.
I mean, I think one of the most common arguments to sort of shut down the anti-GMO rhetoric is that in essence, you're doing the same thing. You're just using a different tool to do it. You can either conventionally breed these organisms by crossing thousands of different specimens and hoping for certain combinations of genes to have an expression that you're looking for, and then choosing those plants and then breeding them with one another, which takes multiple generations. Or you can specifically go into the genome and just manipulate one or two or a handful of genes to have the same outcome. It's a different technique with the same outcome, except in many ways, there's actually more risk to doing it the conventional way because
Right.
you're shuffling around 30,000 genes instead of one, two, or three. And so you could have all of these negative outcomes that you didn't anticipate simply because you're manipulating with no specificity.
Yeah, it's almost like if you took a Rubik's Cube and you wanted to solve it, or you had like a side that was all green and there was one white square left, you would think of like genetic engineering as peeling off the white square and then putting a green one on and like the whole side's green now, yay. Or everything else would be like trying to, you know, do the Rubik's Cube and everything else kind of gets changed too. And not that that's necessarily more or
Yeah.
less risky, but I mean, if you think of it that way, then you start seeing the precision that's involved.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's not fair to say it is blanket more risky to do it the conventional way. We've been doing that for
But
hundreds of thousands of years.
I mean, it seems kind of. I don't understand the logic behind saying, "Hey, GMOs need to be tested," and and the truth is that we GMOs are the most tested crops
Hmm.
ever, ever, ever. But how come, why does an Arctic apple or why does a GMO need to jump through all of these regulatory and testing hoops and something that's conventionally bred just, whatever, here, you can eat it now. Like that doesn't make sense.
Yeah. Yeah, you don't have to do anything. You just grow
Yeah.
it and sell it. And like you even have this piece that you wrote recently about these toxins, which have been produced through traditional breeding. Like we know about certain proteins, certain vitamins that can be produced in foods. Foods are just what we have deemed as edible versions of wild plants out there that we then, domesticated and curated. So there are obviously, berries in the woods that you shouldn't eat because they'll kill you. And
Yeah.
sometimes if you crossbreed what we think of as food versus non-food the wrong way, you end up with some of these toxins being expressed in a purely traditional GMO manner. And there are examples of that throughout history where a breeder was either unaware or was irresponsible and produced crops that had these toxic compounds in them and then sold them to people and people potentially died.
Right. I mean, one of the examples in that toxin story that you mentioned is this tragic story actually of a German middle-aged German man, I think it was last year or 2 years ago, who ate stew made of zucchini from his neighbor's garden. And the neighbor gave it to him. It was very nice of her or him, I'm not sure. Nice of them. And he died of cucurbitacin poisoning. It's a toxin, and it's what causes that bitter flavor that you sometimes get in zucchini or cucumbers. And you shouldn't eat them if they're bitter. But for some reason, he wasn't aware of this. He actually really liked the bitter taste, and it wasn't necessarily because of breeding. When you have zucchini or something in the garden, and due to different stressors and different reasons, that the level of that toxin can go a little bit too high, which doesn't happen in commercially bred zucchini because they watch out for that. And he died. And I mean, this was totally natural. This is not there is genetically engineered squash on the market, but this was just conventional garden zucchini. And yeah, nature can do some messed up things.
Yeah, it's funny because I think the conventional wisdom is that these mistakes can only be made by mad scientists. But of course, agriculture is science. I mean, the very first time that we cultivated a crop and sort of like changed it for our own, devices and our own needs was a scientific endeavor. And we've just been improving on that throughout the years. And so one thing that we often don't sit and talk about is why GMOs are good, why it is that we want to have GMO technology and we want to continue to improve it, because there are some incredibly beneficial outcomes of tinkering with these genes in the lab, aren't there?
There are, and like you said, we want to continue to improve it. There's so much potential, and you often hear this argument, GMOs had so much promise, and they haven't followed through on this promise. And that's totally right. And it's often or largely because of anti-GMO sentiments that the regulatory atmosphere is it's so expensive and arduous to bring something from research to market that only these commodity crops from big companies there are some exceptions, but tend to be able to wrangle this, right? And
Yeah, and there's
if
three
people
different agencies, right, that you have to
right
get them through. There's like
and
the USDA, there's the
FDA, and
FDA,
then I
and the
think
FTC, I think.
and the problem here is, I like to say, we were just talking about this over the weekend too, like, if we could just have a non-browning avocado, then people would be so happy. And I swear, like, I think all of this anti-GMO sentiment would go away. I mean, because could you imagine having a non-browning avocado? And it's kind of this catch-22, because yeah, it would be expensive and really difficult to get a non-browning avocado to market, and it's fully possible to do this. But because of fear of consumer rejection, these kind of things aren't getting to us, or like a tear-free onion or a gluten-free
Yeah.
wheat.
Well, one
And
thing that Kevin Folta has often said, because he works specifically in
right.
Florida, I've had him on the show before, but he works on citrus greening, is that like it may take people not having oranges anymore before they're willing to, it's like, would you rather have a GMO orange or no orange at all?
Yeah.
Like, because it may
Yeah.
get to that point because the oranges are dying. These citrus trees are just infected and they're dying. And until we can come up with an appropriate solution, which often requires genetic modification, you may actually have to lose your favorite food before you realize why GMOs matter.
And yeah, I mean, I talk to Kevin regularly. I haven't heard him say that specific point before, but that's an interesting and scary prospect. But yeah,
Yeah.
that might very well be true.
Yeah, we live in such abundance, it's like it seems like a privileged problem to have to choose between GMOs or non-GMOs because we have a Whole Foods on every corner in certain parts of our country. And it's just not like that, for much of the US and definitely for other countries. And so we forget sometimes about how necessary GMOs are, maybe not for us, but for
Hmm.
individuals that are struggling, that do rely on staple crops that can be wiped out by a single disease, or by individuals who live in a part of the world where they just don't get certain nutrients. And if we could fortify these staple crops with them, we could prevent death.
Yeah. I mean, and that's the bottom line, prevent death. And people say, oh, you're fear mongering when you say that these injustices are, are so awful that it causes death. I'm like, no, it literally causes death.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. And I have to make one other point about the labeling thing that always gets my goat is that I
uh
kind of feel like we don't even need a damn label because the anti-GMO industry, the pro-organic industry has already volitionally labeled everything as non-GMO. And so it's like, does it
yes.
not have one of those stupid non-GMO labels? Just assume it has GMOs in it then.
Exactly. And
It's
it
marketing.
and back to citrus, like what makes me perhaps the most angry in the grocery store, at least lately over the past few weeks, is walking into the grocery store. And I don't regularly buy orange juice, but like I buy these little oranges for my kids, like cuties or halos or
Yeah, the little
whatever.
like they're like tangerine kind of
Yeah,
thingies, right?
but
Yeah.
and they're really easy to peel and like small and
Oh,
cute and
mandarin
delicious.
oranges. I think that's what
Yeah,
they are.
and
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
but both orange juice and now these oranges have picked up the non-GMO project label, or some orange juice companies just self-certify as non-GMO, and I'm like, way to shoot yourself in the foot, guys. Like this
I
is the technology
know.
that will save you, and you're just going after the latest marketing
It's
fad.
so crazy. And also, everything says non GMO that, like, if with a little bit of background and understanding, you already know is non GMO because there's only, like, what, 14 GMO crops on the market. That might be I just used a random number, but
Right. I mean,
it's
it's
low. It's
eight.
under
It's
20,
Yeah,
right?
it's eight right now. Actually 9 or 10 because these potatoes and apples are
And the
starting
new
to make their
apples,
way into
yeah.
the market. But I mean, I
Oh, you're
wish the
right. It was
number was a
only
lot
8
higher.
prior
But
to
yeah,
that.
really, if you know a few things, like you could easily avoid GMOs in your grocery store shopping. But
Yeah,
yeah, I
let's
mean,
let's
these
let's
guys
point
are
out that
skilled.
list. They so
Yeah.
are. Let's point out that list just one more time so that people know. Corn, soybean, cotton, canola, sugar beet, alfalfa, papaya, and squash. And
There you
then
go.
now we're starting to see the apple. What's it called? It's the
The
non-browning
Arctic,
apple.
it's the
The
Arctic
Arctic
apple,
apple.
and
Yeah.
then the potato, which made by a company called Simplot. It was known as the innate potato, but it's being branded as white russet, and it's going to say white russet on the bag. Um,
And what
so
what about why what does the modification do for that potato? We know with the apple, the Arctic apple,
right,
it makes it
um,
so it doesn't brown when you cut it, which is freaking
right,
awesome. What
and
does the
also
potato do?
when you hit it, so it doesn't bruise, it
It doesn't
reduces
bruise.
waste. Awesome,
Yeah.
because I mean, stores all the way down the chain, apples get thrown out because of this bruising. But the potato is actually pretty much the same trait. It's a non-browning, non-bruising potato. And we actually did this experiment at the Chicago Science Fest over the weekend, where we had this white russet potato shredded into a cup, and then regular russet potatoes shredded into a cup, and then also regular russets shredded with lemon juice over them, and waited a few hours. And yeah, the white russet stays white and also doesn't bruise. So the big thing with that is food waste. It
Mm-hmm.
also has a reduced amount of acrylamide, which is a carcinogen, which uh, the compound turns to acrylamide when a potato is fried or heated up to certain temperatures. Now, the level of acrylamide in a conventional potato isn't going to hurt you anyway. It's not going to cause cancer. So it's not like a huge trait, but that's also
But
one
they
of the
threw that in
traits.
for good measure.
Yeah, and then the next generation, I believe, has a blight resistant trait in too.
Oh,
So,
neat. That's
I mean, if
good.
you're worried about food waste, there are so many reasons, right, that we choose to buy certain things outside of taste and cost and flavor and enjoyment and stuff. And yeah, food waste is a big one. And if you're anti-food waste, then you're you're going to want to buy these apples and these potatoes. And I swear I'm not on their payroll. I'm just waiting to buy these myself.
Yeah. So I have to ask also about, because you've been really good about countering some of the pernicious rhetoric of a very particular person, and also a friend of the podcast who we had on probably at this point a couple of years ago, Yvette I can never pronounce her
Oh,
last name.
D'Entremont. Yeah.
D'Entremont, thank you.
Yeah.
You guys both have really spoken out against a very particular individual named Vani Hari, aka the Food Babe. You want to tell me a little bit about about her and why she is so dangerous?
Yeah, I mean, I think her danger level has been dialed down quite a bit thanks to people like Yvette and others who have been so tenacious and kind of going after all of her claims. But for those of your listeners who aren't familiar, Vani Hari, her blog name is The Food Babe, is a self-proclaimed investigator of what's really in your food. She's known for the easily debunked statement that there's absolutely no amount of chemical to ingest ever. But she was especially dangerous a few years ago, and she was kind of one of the most prominent misinformation vectors when it comes to food and health. Her one of her tactics is to choose an ingredient. Or a process, and then go after a specific large food company and petition that food company to drop the ingredient, even though that ingredient might be innocuous and beneficial. And I mean, she would promote all kinds of misinformation, and so she's actually a really good framework, I think, to address not only address the myths themselves, but why they proliferate. And so I've addressed her quite a bit in my writing, including in a book called The Fear Babe, Shattering Vani Hari's Glass House. But it's funny now, again, coming back to the mom thing. I wish her the best with her new addition, but she had a baby, I think, a few months ago, which is all fine, but now she's giving parenting advice.
Yeah.
And one of the more dangerous ones was, she happily declared that she didn't get the vitamin K shot for her newborn, and the vitamin K shot prevents hemorrhaging and uncontrolled bleeding in newborns because they're not born with enough vitamin K, which they then start getting when they have solid food. So this vitamin K shot prevents this dangerous and often deadly bleeding. And the Food Babe wrote something to the effect of, we didn't go with the vitamin K shot because it might cause XYZ, but instead we went with the oral dose Stanford protocol, oral dose of vitamin K. And there is no Stanford protocol. Basically, Stanford has this document that says, hey, you really shouldn't forgo the vitamin K shot because that shit's dangerous. But hey, if you're really going to forego it because, I don't know, you just don't know any better, then here's an oral dose. Like, that's essentially what it says.
That's amazing. But that's the Stanford protocol now. And Stanford's
Yeah.
like, wait, what?
Yeah.
What?
Yeah, someone probably should tell Stanford anyway.
I'm sure somebody there has like a press
Yeah.
release to counter. But yeah, and that's like the least of the horrible things that she's done and advocated for.
Yeah. They all kind of blend together now, don't they? Yeah, there are some pretty horrible things that she advocates for.
And it's just so scary and so dangerous, and it comes across in this. I mean, I think to most skeptics, they look at it and they go, it's so sanctimonious. But to somebody who doesn't know any better, it kind of comes across as like, no, but I'm your guardian. I'm helping you
Mm-hmm.
not be harmed by big ag and big food and these corporate interests that really just care about their bottom lines and don't care about whether or not you're going to be harmed by their products. And of course, that sounds like a good argument to me. I don't want to be harmed by greedy corporate interests. I want to protect myself. But then, like, who are these people to make these claims? Like, there's no governing body that they're working for. They don't have any academic credentials to back up the points that they're making. And oftentimes we see like these sort of non-regulated quote unquote credentials, like somebody may be a naturopath or somebody
Uh-huh.
may be a quote nutritionist, which really at least in the US for the most part doesn't
Right.
mean anything. And all of a sudden it's like, oh well, I have expertise, so you should listen to me, which it's so
Mm-hmm.
hard as a consumer to know the difference.
Yeah, it's really hard to sift through all of. I mean, it's really easy to cherry pick science or to take specific people who might have certain credentials but are otherwise quacks and to use them to back up your messaging and your rhetoric. And so yeah, I mean, for the average person, it is hard to differentiate between science-y sounding stuff
Mm.
and credible information.
Yeah, it's true. It's so difficult to know the difference. Well, I'm so glad that you are doing your part and going really above and beyond to help fight back against this misinformation and to help basically not just prevent the misinformation campaigns, but start an actual information campaign and to help meet people where they are and show them why it's so necessary and so important to look at health and wellness and parenting and all of these other aspects of our lives in a science-based, evidence-based way. So I have to thank you for that because I read your stuff all the time and use it all the time on the Skeptic's Guide. So
Ah,
you are
thank
a
you.
great resource for me. But before we go, I would love to ask you the same two questions that I ask everybody who I have on the show because I'm super interested in your perspective. So you ready for that?
All right, let's go.
Ready or not, we're about to
Ah!
do it. All right. So think about the future. And it could be the future for your life, your family, the future for your work, but it could also just be the future of humanity, the future of, the planet, and so on and so forth. Whatever context really, I think, resonates for you. I want you to tell me first, what is the thing that you are most concerned about, that keeps you up the most at night, that, preoccupies your time and makes you worry? But then on the flip side of that, so that we don't, end this podcast crying, what is the thing that you're really optimistic and hopeful and excited about?
Gosh, well, it's hard for me to think so far into the future sometimes because I'm just worried about getting my kids fed into school
And
on
that's
time, and
fine too.
they have not been late. I don't think they've
That's
been late this
good.
whole year when I've dropped
It's
them off.
good. Have they
But
ever gone to school with a snack that said non-GMO though? It's
I
almost
don't think
impossible to
so.
avoid that.
Well, yes, no, I got to correct myself because I do sometimes buy those little oranges. But yeah,
Yeah.
like the future, like along with the regular world peace worries and of course climate change, I'd say like a world without oranges or a world where a staple crop is wiped out is pretty scary to me. It's hard for me to say, what's the most scary, but that's one of them.
Mhm.
And then what was the other question? What am I hopeful about?
Yeah, what are you excited? What do you look forward to? What do you kind of have optimism about?
Right. So I guess I'm not thinking like millennia down the line here, but I see, I do see that a change is slowly happening in terms of critical thinking, not only in the public, but maybe even policy wise. I've heard through the grapevine that there are companies, big companies even, who have considered making changes based on public misconceptions but have instead
Mhm.
decided to side with science because of these pro science movements, whether they be online, whether they be phone calls that people make or emails that people send. And I mean, I don't really care so much about the well-being of corporations, but when companies side with science, again, like I said, this is all part of the cycle that drives public perception and policy. And so I think it's important when companies make these good decisions. And so that gives me hope. And I think that if we keep chipping away and keep working together to do that, then we can create a change and for the better. So yeah.
I love it. Well, Kevin, thank you so much for joining me this week. Before you go, let everybody know one more time where they can read your work, where they can find you on social media, and where they can say hello.
Yeah, well, I post all my work on my public Facebook page, Kavin Senapathy, and my Twitter at K Senapathy.
Awesome. Awesome. And of course, they can follow you to find all of those things, or they can just Google your name and see where
Yeah,
you're writing.
there are
Uh,
not too many Kavin Senapathies online. Maybe a
I
couple.
yeah, I believe that. I believe that. I have the same thing with my name. I think
Right.
there's one or two other Cara Santa Marias. I feel like I used to be the only one,
Yeah.
but yeah, there's got to be.
It makes
There's
us an easy target, but it's also really easy to Google us. So
Oh, hell
there
yeah,
we
it's
go.
great. I wouldn't trade it for anything. Well, Kevin, this was so much fun. Thank you once again for joining me. I really, really learned a lot, and I know that I said a lot. I meant a lot. And I know
Yeah,
that my listeners did as well.
It's Monday.
Yeah, exactly. And hey, everybody listening, thank you for coming back week after week. I'm really looking forward to the next time we all get together to talk nerdy.